Prime Minister has a spotless voting record. He's there to answer questions, and he relies on his team. We have a very, very strong cabinet team who are in the House of Commons every day answering questions and holding ourselves accountable.
Government House Leader from our conversation that you will see next hour, defending the Prime Minister's attendance at question period. The Liberals passed about 21 bills over the spring sitting, but how productive and transparent is the majority government proving to be? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo is a writer for The Economist. He's in Ottawa. Catherine Levesque is an Ottawa parliamentary reporter for The National Post. And Gary Mason is a columnist for The Globe and Mail. He's in Vancouver. Good morning to everyone. I'm actually going to start where the Stephen McKinnon clip began, and that's on the Prime Minister's attendance at question period. The Conservatives brought out a cake to celebrate or mark his absences. Rob, I wonder what you make of the fact that the Prime Minister has missed so many question periods and whether you think that matters.
I think it does. I think it also underscores almost the irrelevance of the House of Commons these days, and that's a sad thing for Canadians and for Canadian democracy. I think he missed almost 3/4 of the House of Commons sessions. And you compare that to Stephen Harper, whose attendance was about 60%. Justin Trudeau's around 45%. It just goes down further and further. And I don't think that that's good for democracy. Yes, it's true that what passes for wit these days is painful. Often in the House of Commons, and that questions are geared really for slicing, dicing, social media, fundraising, that sort of thing. But I don't think it's good for our democracy. I would also say that part of the reason that the Conservatives are complaining is because even in the absence of the Prime Minister, that increases the shivering of Pierre Poilievre in the shadow of that absence, because without an interlocutor, without a mano, it's very hard for Mr. Poilievre to gain any kind of attention on Parliament Hill. So the Conservatives don't like it. For those reasons, I think Canadians should be concerned about it as well.
And Catherine, what about the fact that, last week, of course, he was at the G7. No one expects him to skip the G7 to attend question period. But there are days where, as Melissa Lantsman suggested in that other clip, he's in his office doing other things. Do Canadians expect him to be focused on doing the job of Prime Minister? Does that include question period? What do you think?
Yeah, and I think the Conservatives, to be fair to them, they said, we understand and we support the idea of the Prime Minister being at the G7 and at other international summits. But yeah, nearly 2/3 of this time where he missed question period, he was in Ottawa, or at least he was, in his office, or he was close enough where he could have really made it. So I think it's unfortunate that he has missed so many. Liberals will say, well, the Prime Minister has a really busy schedule. He's meeting dignitaries. There have been a lot of things going on in Ottawa. That's true. Justin Trudeau and Stephen Harper were also just as busy. So I think Mark Carney could make a bit more of an effort. He was, when he was asked about this a few weeks ago by our colleague David Akin, he said, well, I answer questions all the time. He does answer the media's questions, but at the same time, I think he should be in the House of Commons a bit more to answer the opposition's questions. And I think they are important. To Rob's point, yes, I think the Conservatives do ask a lot of very repetitive questions, and maybe they could benefit from, having a bit more variety in those questions. But, the other opposition parties also ask very important questions. The Bloc Québécois, for instance, and the thing with Mark Carney is he actually answers questions. So I think, it's a good thing when he's in the House of Commons. But, at the same time, I think this is something that he should change, and maybe stunts like the cake, which looked very good, by the way. Hopefully that's something that will continue, and maybe he'll change his attitude in the fall.
Gary, what do you think? I don't think anyone on this panel thinks that question period is great and that it gets to a lot of substantive answers and questions. But it's a feature in our democracy. And I don't know, if the Prime Minister is not there, I'm not sure what that says.
Obviously, it is a feature, and the degree to which it's important these days and in the last number of years is debatable. I think that the one thing that has to be taken into consideration is the absolutely extraordinary times in which we're in right now. I mean, there is a threat to Canada, the likes of which we haven't seen, most of us in our lifetime, the economic threat and, other types of threats coming from the South. So, I mean, the Prime Minister has had an incredible challenge ahead of him. And the biggest challenge is looking for other partners, trade partners, to bolster, to kind of mitigate the damage that's been done to the Canadian economy by Donald Trump. So he has really gone on a global roadshow to a number of different nations around the world. He spent an extraordinary amount of time in Europe, as you're aware. So I think this sales pitch that he's making to these nations it's incredibly important, and it has taken him away from the House of Commons in Ottawa. But I think that most Canadians would be willing to say that that's a trade-off they're prepared to make at this point in time. Now, eventually, these trips will become less common, I guess, after we begin to see, hopefully, the fruits of his labor from these overtures. And then he may be, the excuses he may have for not being in question period will be scarcer. But I think right now, I honestly, Rosie, I don't think the question period appearance is on the minds of the majority of Canadians. I think it's mostly an Ottawa obsession right now. And I think that Canadians are more concerned about other things that Mark Carney is doing outside of Canada to drum up business for this country.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about the legislative agenda, because a number of bills did get pushed over the finish line, in large part because the government used different mechanisms to limit debate. It also tabled a bunch of things that it's going to have to deal with on the digital file next fall. What did some of the priorities there tell you, Rob, about the way the government is approaching its agenda?
Well, I think we finally got a sense through the aggressive use of time allocation of what the Prime Minister meant when he talked about moving at speeds that we'd never seen before. 21 bills in 14 weeks is not a leisurely pace. It's a sprint. So we got a sense that way. I think it occurred, though, because he collected 5 MPs from a couple of parties in a very short amount of time. The rumors around Ottawa was Theodore Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party was going to lose a member of Parliament next. It was amazing. We have to remember that atmosphere was a crazy kind of hothouse atmosphere with people apparently about to cross any moment now. And it did feel that way for a while. The Conservatives certainly were reeling, but that revealed the magic of a majority government. That's what allowed the government to move as swiftly, if not as adroitly as it did, because they did have to send some bills back. The haste certainly, I think, had an impact on some of their legislation as well.
Yeah. Catherine, what do you think about the speed at which they did things?
It was very fast. I think they're using their majority to ram through a number of bills, and some of which have what we would call poison pills, things that maybe should have warranted more study. One clear example of that is C30, which changes a lot of Canada's pesticides laws. And I think it's unfortunate that we didn't really have time to hear from experts on that. It was basically implementing the spring economic statement. So I think that's something that they did mention that they wanted to change it. However, this has major consequences. And unfortunately, just because of the breakneck speed at which we did things, and also because of the Conservatives' obstruction, let's not forget that, where they talked about the CPP, they didn't talk about pesticides. But I think we can really see with these bills that the government is willing to move very fast, but they're doing it in two ways, which I think are maybe a little bit problematic. First of which is creating more bureaucracy, new agencies to kind of make things a little bit faster. And in some cases, appointing some of Mark Carney's CEO friends to make them happen. The other way is the government, like we saw with C5, like we saw with C30, is basically giving more power to the government to ignore some laws or just make some exceptions in the name of national security or economic security. So I think those are two trends that we're seeing more and more, and I would expect that we would see that moving forward as we continue with this majority government.
About 30 seconds left for you, Gary. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I sort of agree with my colleagues here. I mean, I think speed is the raison d'etre of this government. Mark Carney has made it clear that there is no time to waste in trying to transform our economy away from complete reliance on the Americans. So, I mean, the speed is going to cause problems eventually. It'll catch up to the government because they'll try and overreach and do things that weren't maybe completely thought through. Yeah. This is a full forge ahead as quickly as possible, no time to waste. And I think we'll probably see more of it in the fall, to be honest with you.
We plan all summer long to fight against the liberal recession, liberal inflation, the rising liberal cost of living, and the rising liberal crime crisis in our streets.
As the Conservatives lay out their priorities, the Liberal government preparing for the challenges ahead, from trade negotiations with the U.S., a pipeline proposal deadline that Alberta must meet, an Alberta referendum in the fall. What should we be watching for in the coming months? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Rob Russo, a writer for The Economist. He's in Ottawa. Catherine Levesque, an Ottawa parliamentary reporter for the Post, National Post. And Gary Mason, a columnist for the Globe and Mail, and he's in Vancouver. Catherine Levesque, I'm going to start with you on this one. So the legislative stuff is done, but the Prime Minister is going to have a pretty busy summer. I didn't even mention the fact that there's a budget in the fall now, so all that kind of work has to start through the summer too. Yeah. What do you see as the biggest challenge or hurdle for the Prime Minister in the weeks and months ahead?
I would definitely go with the pipeline project, just because we are expecting Alberta to submit something by July 1st. All those deadlines are sometimes a social construct, so we'll see if that actually happens by then. Yeah, we journalists know that. But at the same time, it's unclear right now if there will be a private proponent for this project. We don't know the route of this project either, so I'll be interested to see what exactly Alberta proposes and how vague it is. And then the pressure will be on the federal government to approve this project or, make it into a national interest project by October 1st. So there will certainly be a lot of pressure on the government to do that. Now, the federal government has consistently said, well, we're not going, there is no private proponent. We are expecting one to come up, but I don't see how we can reconcile that with the fact that there is a referendum on, happening in the fall. So as of right now, the proponent is the Alberta government. So are we going to be in a similar situation with TMX where we will be paying as taxpayers for a potential project? I think that will be certainly the thing to follow. And then, it also relates to the Alberta referendum, right? So I would expect a lot of reaction, from Alberta, but certainly also the rest of the country and environmental groups on this.
Yeah, I mean, Calgary Stampede is always a sort of a don't miss event for politicians. I would imagine this year it's going to be pretty intense, Gary, because people need to show up to talk about some of these things, to talk about separation. But give me your thoughts on what you think is a big challenge for the government in the months ahead.
Well, I mean, I think Catherine's identified it. I mean, the pipeline is the biggest, I think, domestic issue facing Carney. And there are so many problems that surround it. Right now, it's almost impossible to see sort of through all the smoke that surrounds the project right now. It's impossible to see sort of the finish line. But I mean, there's a lot of pushback in the industry, in the oil industry right now, to the Pathways project. At one time, everybody seemed to be on board with carbon capture and storage, what the federal government has made as a condition, but the costs of that project continue to grow, and now you're talking about like almost $30 billion by one estimate. So there's a lot of pushback to that. And then you've got $30 billion on top of that to build the pipeline itself. So there's $60 billion that you're looking at before you even get going. There's people in the industry in Alberta still angry about the fact that the industrial carbon price is going to continue to increase. They think that that's kind of a deal breaker. I think the other thing that, we were talking earlier, Rosemary, about, legislation that, was rammed through. Legislation that didn't go through was around the approvals process. The government wants to find ways to speed up the approval process. There was a lot of pushback among environmental groups to that. The federal government essentially wants to approve projects and then get environmental, approvals after that. And there's, obviously that is what Alberta wants, but there's a lot of people are saying no to that. So I think that there's little landmines all over this particular issue, and then you have First Nations pushing back. I don't see a pipeline going to the northern coast. I just don't. So I think you're looking at a southern route, and I think a lot of people in and around this project have almost accepted that as well. So, but that's the number one issue, I think, domestically on the Prime Minister's plate.
Rob, how about you? Got a different answer or the same?
A little different. I think it's part of it. I think I look at the broader rubric of, can the Prime Minister turn his economic vision into reality? That's his challenge over the next 6 months to year and a half. And certainly the pipeline is part of it, although I would say that it's broader than that. The referendum in October, secession isn't actually going to be on the ballot. To me, it's beginning to look like a secession on the status quo. Is the Carney government prepared to offer something more than the status quo on things like equalization? Very difficult to do it on Senate reform, but could they do something on equalization? The other element in terms of making his economic vision real, of course, is dealing with the capricious creature that is Donald Trump. I know we're told over and over again, we're not going off a cliff on July 1st, except there's a guy who's at the wheel who likes to play chicken, gun the accelerator, and turn us towards that cliff and hopefully turn us away. So are we prepared to deal with that? Can he get his economic vision actually in gear with a guy like that? And then the third element to the economic vision is the reality of the pain that Canadian consumers are feeling. It doesn't matter how comfortable we are. I was in Alberta, rural Alberta, a couple of months ago, and even people who are doing very, very well there feel it every time they go in and buy broccoli at $8 for 2 or 3 crowns of broccoli. So can the Prime Minister make his economic vision real with these 3 elements or factors playing into that?
Well, and Catherine, I think Rob's point around what happens with Donald Trump is a good one. I also wonder how the government, even if we expect them to miss the deadline, even if things don't fall apart because of that, you've still missed a deadline, and you still have to show or demonstrate to Canadians that you can get something from the president. And the longer that goes on, I start to wonder whether Canadians say, I thought we elected you to deal with this guy and you still don't have anything yet. I don't know if that becomes an issue that's hard for him to shake in the months ahead too.
Yeah, it's very tough. I mean, for the past year, we've had the government saying, well, we're close to a deal. We might have something eventually. We'll see. And now, I think we're heading towards the option probably of, not falling off a cliff on July 1st, but certainly we're not going towards an extension of CUSMA for 16 years, which is what Canada would like to see. I mean, there are 2 options left. Either, we continue as is for 10 years with annual reviews, which isn't ideal, or as Donald Trump hinted this week, we just, stop the deal completely and the U.S. will remove themselves. But look, realistically, I think we're heading towards the less bad option, the 10 years. And but it's going to create a lot of uncertainty because we're going to be stuck with annual reviews. And every year, the Trump administration can just try to, get concessions out of us, can try to ask us for more things. We're going just to see more and more threats of increased tariffs, like what we saw on forced labor, right? So we'll just be in a constant state yet again of trying to answer and respond to all these new threats. And it's certainly not an ideal environment for businesses and just for Canadians in this country.
30 seconds to you there, Gary.
Yeah, I think that the other thing to look for, Rosie, in the coming months is, as you mentioned earlier, that there's going to be a budget in the fall. I think that one thing that the finance minister has signaled that there could be changes to personal and corporate income taxes. That would be big. Those are often controversial. Sometimes they can be popular, sometimes they can be very unpopular. But there has been a lot of agitating from the business community in particular for some changes. And I think you have a prime minister now and a finance minister who have an appetite to make those changes, even if they're unpopular in some areas. So that's something to keep an eye out. I think that there's going to be hearings over the summer on this issue. So I know it's a little bit dry, but it can be important and will emerge as a bigger issue eventually.
We take dry here too, Gary. Rob and Gary, I neglected to say Happy Father's Day to the two of you gentlemen. So let me say that.
Very kind. Best job I've ever had.
Thank you all very much for being here through the season. We'll see you in the fall. Thanks for being on the last scrum before we take a break. Rob, Kethman, and Gary, thanks, guys.